All right. So think Weinstein, but instead of a powerful male film producer, it's a powerful female orchestra conductor. They'll never see it coming. Nobody will understand it. Very few people will see it. It's time this story. I mean, should I start wearing hats? No, I think I don't have any hair, and I still got hair. Okay, she's not nearly as bad as Weinstein, but on one occasion, she does try to lure one of her victims into her lair while wearing a bathrobe. Tár is a 2022 film written and directed by Todd Field and starring Cate Blanchett as the eponymous Lydia Tár. All-around musical supernova, superstar orchestra conductor, EGOT getter, best-selling author. She does ethnographic field research with uncontacted indigenous tribes in Peru, I think. She runs a fellowship for aspiring young female conductors, although there have been rumors. So at the start of this film, she's really well respected, far along in her career. Everybody loves her. Everyone kind of fears her. She's really intimidating. It is also the story of Lydia cratering that life and destroying her reputation through a series of really questionable moral choices. Terrible, not questionable, terrible. It is a very wordy film that asks a lot of its audience. Not a good date night film. I think it's great. It's rewarding. I see different things every time I watch it. Like the first time through, I didn't realize that she got to choose the fabric on her music book score. She got to choose the fabric of her score, and I didn't even know you could do that. So it rewards multiple viewings. In fact, it demands them. So on one hand, you get a look at this ultra rarefied high-end musical world, like the top echelons of this particular endeavor. And on the other hand, you've got a Me Too story told firmly within the point of view of the perpetrator. I don't think Todd and Cate are ever asking us to sympathize with Lydia, because Lydia Tár kind of sucks. She is a charming kind of suck in her way, but this is not a cancel culture. Tár was not cancel cultured because her actions are pretty terrible. The filmmakers are clear on that. She deserved to be canceled. This film is beautifully shot, wonderfully acted. The cinematography is divine, but it has a bit of an alignment issue. The filmmakers give us a world almost entirely populated by women, and queer women at that. Men don't really factor into this universe. However, the tone of the film and the questions it might be asking don't really seem to come from that world. More from, say, like a older male hetero director. You're left thinking, like, what kind of film is this? Is it one of those, you should walk a mile in my undeniably expensive but fashionably unfashionable Oxfords before you judge? What an unusual villain, and what an unusual venue for villainy. Or it could just be an excuse to talk this highfalutin elitist nonsense for 2.5 hours. Enjoyable, highfalutin elitist nonsense. I mean, I'm not entirely sure if the high-end artistic lesbian world is having this particular problem. And not that I think that films even need to be necessary. Sometimes it's just what's on your mind when you spend $100 million making a film. I know that Ellen turned out to be a fucking asshole. So it's just an interesting choice of a character to set up and then smack down. So yeah, let's explore how Lydia Tár fucked up this sweet, sweet life she had going. As I said, this film asks a lot of you, and your first challenge is to get through the credits, which are a fucking provocation. Well, first of all, there's a very quick cold open with Tár snorking it up on her private jet while someone live streams her, which is not very nice. So you don't really know what's going on. Then cut to black. And for the next 5 minutes, we get a black screen with tiny, tiny white text even smaller than the subtitles by far. And over this, we hear a female solo vocalist a cappella singing in a non-English, non-Western, I'm not non-Western because I think it's Peru. I believe what we're hearing is Tár's ethnographic field research. And you don't really have any context for what's going on or what you're hearing, so you don't know how polite you should be. But this goes on for like 5 full minutes. Okay, you know about movie law? There's these rules that are like, children can't work more than this many hours without going to that school, or no animals were harmed in the making of this film, besides the ones we ate. But a big part of movie law is how they do the credits. And usually there's 2 ways nowadays: is upfront, you do nothing, maybe not even the name of the film, or you do like the top level creatives and producers, the actors, the director, the producer, the writer, and you save everybody else for the crawl at the back, which has everybody, costume designers and gaffers and color by deluxe, something called cactus units sometimes. Tár does neither of these. Tár does a throwback to early Hollywood and goes for the like 1930s through 1960s style of doing everybody up front: the actors, producers, gaffers, Panavision, Lawrence of Arabia style. All of that. So you're sitting there for these 5 minutes looking at all this. And you might be tempted to say, hey, this is going on a bit, isn't it? But you need to be careful because you don't want to be,
whoa, 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 you insensitive Eurocentric fuckhead.
That's the last speaker of an extinct language. What she is doing is very important. Lockdown Bumble. So next we get the as you know section. I don't need to tell you, but I'm going to tell you. This film needs to bring you up to speed pretty quickly on how wonderful Lydia Tár is. This is something that's annoying, but we need to forgive it for films. Otherwise, we wouldn't understand any relationships and we just assume everybody's fucking. Hey, sis, or hey, bro. I never heard anyone say that in real life. When mom and dad died and left us this business that is now failing. So this film comes up with a clever way to handle this by just getting a guy from the New Yorker to get on stage and say it all out loud. So she's being interviewed in front of her adoring public by an obsequious journalist, and he's going over how she's been the first female conductor of all these orchestras, has her PhD in musicosity, makes a special point to put emphasis on that aspiring female conductor fellowship program that Tár runs. So in this way, the film gets a free pass on that artistic genius problem. If you could really write the best song in the world, you would go out and release that song and be that songwriter. You wouldn't like put it in a film and pretend that a fictional character wrote it, except for maybe Prince. Because I know what a good song sounds like or a good ad campaign. I don't really know what a good orchestra conductor looks or sounds like. They all kind of look the same to me. So yeah, I'm willing to accept that Tár is the best it's ever been. While this is going on, we see glimpses of her astonishing life. She's picking out inspiration for her album cover by looking at other album covers, She gets a tailored suit to look like someone on one of those album covers. We see her posing in the mirror, trying to look pensive, like she's working, because she definitely wants this to look like she was captured working.
In essence, a note-for-note copy of somebody else's record, not following the advice she gives everybody else through the course of this film.
There's no glory for a robot, Elliot. Do your own thing.
Giving readings of her book, Tar on Tar. I want to believe that there are people at this level of erudition, that there's this select group of ultra sophisticated, ultra cultured, gliding around minimalist museums, talking about gelatin prints, atonal composers and experimental choreographers, projected thermography, eaten Frisian galaja, like classy shit. Pine nuts, pine nut mousse. Everyone kind of looks like the sexy garbage dump trash lady from The Walking Dead. And people like her have either completely unpronounceable Icelandic names or completely pull off names like Pollyanna McIntosh. So in this section, we also hear about the project that she's currently working on and that she ruins with her predatory malfeasance. She's working on recording all 8 of Gustav Mahler's symphony cycles. I guess no single composer has done all 8, like no one's done the full octomom yet. She's not doing them in order because she saved the most profound or complex one for last, and that's Mahler number 5, the big V. I don't know about Mahler. Mahler does not appear in Hooked on Classics. He seems to do a lot of like trumpety, the final countdown kind of like. That kind of stuff. And although she's married, we do see that she is not above giving some attention to some of her young, attractive female fans. I mean, they probably wouldn't characterize themselves as fans, much less groupies. What are you insinuating? We're just discussing the qualities of rhythm, baton technique. As we can see from her assistant's knowing eye rolls, this is not uncommon.
I saw you conduct the Rite of Spring at the Met last year. It was so powerful.
Her wife back in Berlin is also like really involved with the orchestra that's making all these Mahler recordings.
Gerissen, ganz kurz, mit viel Energie.
I'm sure there's no problematic conflicts of interest there at all. Not that Tár gives a fuck. Okay, now I'm coming to you from the future. From the future. In my excitement, I knocked the camera out of focus last week. So none of the footage for this part was usable, so I'm doing it again. So before we head off to Berlin, we're going to audit Lydia Tár's class at Juilliard. So at Juilliard, she is a guest lecturer, and it's the first time we see the fault in her stars. She exhibits a lot of the behaviors and attitudes that will eventually lead to her downfall. She is not speaking to fans or sycophants or people who depend on her for their livelihoods. She's in a position where people can challenge her. She's speaking to college students, after all, and college students are sometimes comfortable with confrontation. When we first walk in, we hear what I assumed was the soundtrack to the film. It's like this atonal, tension-y kind of horror movie score. But it turns out it's diegetic. This is the music that the students are performing for Tár. I thought, yeah, somebody needs to make this kind of music. She singles out the student conductor for that piece, whose name is Max.
It's an important text.
She hits him with both barrels.
Antonia Brico thought so. So much so that she shipped herself to equatorial Africa and canoed up the Congo River.
And somewhere in the deluge, she says, have you read this biography of Bach by so-and-so. Oh, you said you must, it's transmogrifying. And the only thing he says to set her off is, I'm not really into Bach. He literally says, I'm not really into Bach.
I'm not really into Bach.
And he's really nervous talking to her. He's intimidated. You can see he's exhibiting some physical discomfort, which she is oblivious to, or when she does notice, seems annoyed by. He says he's not into the old white cis patriarchal composers of the past. He identifies as a pangendered BIPOC, which is Black or Indigenous person of color. I did some asking around, and pangendered people can use any pronoun they're comfortable with. And since it's not designated within the film, I did some research, and this actor uses he. So I'm going to go with he. So he doesn't relate and doesn't feel he has to relate to the old white cis Bach. Tár goes into a charm offensive.
Or Schroeder playing for Lucy.
Who can resist? So she starts advocating a separate art from artist philosophy for some reason. And you can tell she's used to arguing from an exceptional outsider vantage. That her position as a gay woman allows her to kind of kosher things which might be unpalatable otherwise. Like, give people permission to engage. It's all right to like these old white cis patriarchy guys and just listen to their music and try to see what the music is saying and not get too hung up on anyone's personal antics. At one point, she presents as one of her bona fides that she's a U-Haul lesbian. She's not, or I don't think she is. I'm not saying she didn't bring a U-Haul to the date, but there's definitely a two-seater sports car out idling by the girls' dormitory. I mean, beyond the politics of this argument, she's still a visiting teacher shitting all over the music that he's presented. She has no respect for this piece.
What do you make of what we've just been listening to?
It's pretty awesome. There's incredible atonal tension.
I agree about the tension part.
So Max says, that's great, I hear your argument. You play really well, but I am still not into Bach. And this is where the turntables turn their tables. Tár starts losing her patience, puts hands on the boy.
Just not my thing.
Don't be so eager to be offended.
Put hands on the non-binary person. Put hands on the student, and not in the way she normally gets in trouble for. She's like, that's not, you shouldn't be thinking that way. You, as a conductor, needs to not worry about the identity of who wrote the music and just get straight to the text. And then she brings up an example, the woman who wrote the piece that Max was conducting, who, just a second ago, she was shitting all over, saying it sounded like violins being tuned. Anna, Icelandic name.
Anna Thorwald's daughter gave.
I am not going to attempt the pronunciation.
Let's consider Max's thing. In this case, Anna Thorvaldsdottir.
And she says, this woman's pretty hot, right? And everyone agrees, all their hands go up.
And two, that she is, in a Waldorf teacher kind of way, a super hot young woman. Show of hands.
Like, it's settled law that this woman's hot. And she says, so Max, people not appreciating her music because she's hot is exactly the same thing as you not liking Bach because he's this old man hired for being an old white patriarchy man. And by the way, they're going to call you hot. So you need to be careful. And extra, by the way, if anyone notices that my conducting women's fellowship thing is all hot women, that shouldn't be noticed and should not be remarked upon because it's not fair. Max's counter-argument is to call her a fucking bitch and walk out.
You're a fucking bitch.
Gender-specific insult. Never again did Max mention the day he told Lydia Tár to fuck off to her face. And here's a glaring example of that alignment issue I may have mentioned earlier. So I'm watching this with half a brain thinking, oh, going to school in New York, the Juilliard, it's so hot and it's so cold. And I'm like, wait a minute. This is like a boomer, snowflake, safe place. College students can't handle an intellectual challenge. Straw man argument, isn't it? It certainly can be read that way. Who are we supposed to root? There's no way that famed director Todd Field is making a point about the closed-mindedness or oversensitivity of today's youth, is it? It kind of is. I do not believe that in that situation, someone of Max's generation would be that confrontational with a visiting celebrity lecturer. I definitely think he would extend a bit more latitude to a gay woman before he blew up and walk out. I mean, they get the reputation as entitled and whatnot, but every generation gets that reputation. And this one seems to be defined mostly by their social anxiety. Tár, for her part, doesn't seem too broken up about it. In fact, she seems pleased because she won. And she goes on to say something that I don't disagree with, really, that if you're a conductor and you're hired, your job is to look at the music and interpret it and not worry too much about the politics or the origin. And you can't let the identity of who wrote the music get in the way. You can't let your own identity get in the way. You need to get out of your own way. I don't believe that Max would be so viciously and stubbornly opposed to that argument, that he's saying, fuck you, and walking away. We've already got an entire film where the villain is a marginalized woman. You know, on top of all these lesbian women that are abusing their power and victimizing everybody, the real problem is pangendered college students of color. I mean, Todd, come on, right now. I mean, I don't think any of us should have an opinion on what's wrong with the kids today and just try and support them. And then on the other hand, the parent in me is thinking, if my kid wanted to go to music school, conductor school, private conductor school, and the one person making a good living at this game came in to speak, you should listen to what she has to say. I will say it's clear that Tár cares. Like, she's trying to communicate her experience to these students. Like, a lot of celebrities and lecturers, they don't really care. I mean, if a real celebrity showed up and had that much to say, I would be very surprised. So we're in Berlin. What are the crimes of Lydia Tár? We've been flirting around it, saying that she's got this fall coming, but what does she do? So we go back to Berlin and we see her working. You almost don't want her to get in any trouble because this is kind of fun seeing her do her conductor thing and like the minutia of like what a conductor does when she's recording.
Okay, it's not.
The talk's getting around that Lydia Tár uses her Women's Conductor Fellowship program as a place to get dates. And one such hopeful is named Krista. And I don't know what happened. Tár got bored with her. Krista's getting a little too clingy. Why don't we be together for real? Why are you ashamed of me? Martian her metronome. So Krista gotta go. Krista does not react well to being dumped and starts to like a little mild stalking, a little weirdness here and there. Tár's response to this vulnerable young woman is to destroy her life and destroy all her prospects. Lydia goes on an email campaign using her considerable influence and standing in this musical universe to like tell everybody not to hire Krista, to stay away from Krista. She's irrational. She's too emotional. She's on her period too much. Her corset is too tight. All the things women usually say about each other and commit to writing. This does not help the situation, and Krista, unfortunately, Complete suicide. Tár, realizing she's in a bit of trouble, proceeds with a foolproof method of covering her tracks, and that is to delete her personal email. As Lou Pearlman and Jared Fogle can probably tell you, this doesn't work. In this universe, I guess it kind of does, because she doesn't even think that the people that have received these emails also have copies. But Tár sees as a flaw in her plan that her assistant also has copies of these emails or other correspondence. So Tár lays on the old Weinstein.
Francesca, you did as I asked and deleted any and all correspondence with Krista, correct?
I mean, you wouldn't want to ruin your friendship with me by not deleting all those emails. And oh, by the way, I'm about to fire this old guy. So if a certain someone was to play ball and delete some incriminating emails, she might have a shot at his position in the orchestra. Now, Francesca knows the game. Again, heavily implied that she was one of Tár's proteges, but she wasn't as clingy as stupid old Krista. Deleting the emails in this world is the equivalent of going into the hotel room and coming out with a small part in Shakespeare in Love. Now, Francesca does it. But when she expects to be rewarded, so there's that conundrum. There's also a good-looking, young, new cellist on the scene, and her name's Olga. Tár does some shenanigans with the orchestra. Olga becomes a part of the family. It's clear that Tár is interested in Olga. She is giving her private mentorship sessions at her apartment. So Olga gets this position that she's not supposed to get. She gets the solo that she's not supposed to get. Some weird orchestra politics. And it's not cool. Olga, for her part, is pretty hip to the scene. She seems to know what's going on and plays it for her benefit. When Tár takes her to New York, she pretends she's going to sleep when she actually slips out on a date.
I go to sleep now.
Yeah, me too. I'll probably do the same.
When Lydia is driving her home, she has Lydia bring her to like a cinder block bunker covered in graffiti with no windows and like a weird ominous hole for a door. Yeah, I live here. So if you ever show up in the night at like 1 o'clock in the morning and want to be all weird about it, this is where you come. This is where I live. Anyway, so Lydia goes to fire the old guy that she's going to fire, rotate out. And he was like, I know what you're doing. Ever since I saw that girl, I knew my days were numbered. The audience like doesn't know what girl he's talking about. It could be any number of girls, but still him saying that kind of spooks her, spooks Lydia. So even though Francesca was playing ball and didn't ruin her relationship with Lydia and deleted the emails, perfectly cleaning the slate, Lydia does not honor their agreement. She does not get her role in The English Patient. This is a pretty big tactical mistake, because if you had to choose your opponent, would you choose the 70-year-old retired cellist or the young, technically savvy digital native who, by the way, has access to the actual evidence of your wrongdoing? I mean, Francesca probably knows her way around TikTok. She can probably manifest a public Google Doc. Not a good choice, Lydia. All this to say, Francesca quits and makes all this stuff public. And then someone remixed a cell phone video of Lydia's little tete-a-tete with Max back at Juilliard and edited it to make her look horrible. She didn't look so great to begin with, but the editing was brutal. So things are collapsing. Her wife finds out about Olga and leaves her. The orchestra's sponsors don't want her around. She gets taken off the Deutsche Grammophon recording project. It's not good. So we're at the part of the story where her reputation is in tatters and her professional and personal life have been destroyed, but she hasn't crossed over into like criminal activity yet. So that's what's next. She was taken off the Deutsche Grammophon project of recording Mahler, but the show's got to go on. So this doofus guy that she was like begging her for advice earlier, he gets selected as the replacement conductor. In a clever bit of misdirection, we see Tár preparing herself backstage, much as she did at the start of the film. But when she goes to take her position on the conductor's podium, there's already somebody there. And she punches them and pushes them down and starts kicking them and yelling. So she has shown up uninvited to the recording concert and beat the shit out of her replacement. But can we still enjoy her work? Okay, so we've come to the end of the road. We've witnessed Lydia's spectacularly unhelpful response to her cancellation, which is to kick the shit out of some dude on stage in front of an audience. What's there to do? She meets with her PR team to strategize. They don't have anything. We're going to start over. She has that scene where she goes back, and I think we're meant to be shocked, or it's meant to be a twist, that Tár is from humble beginnings. Her name is not Lydia Tár, spelled with the accent aigu or whatever it is. It's Linda, T-A-R-R, pronounced Linder, because she's from somewhere in New York. Middle-class upbringing. This doesn't surprise me. If you had any Congress with the offspring of the upper class, tend not to be all that cultured. I'm generalizing, but growing up in a privileged environment generally doesn't produce that sort of erudition. That's the product of someone trying to escape, or someone with a lot of time on their hands, bored with an active mind. So not really a big twist, doesn't really surprise me. I think she could have gotten away with being Linda Tár. It's not that different. But what does she do? What's her plan? She decides to visit the set of Apocalypse Now, of course. Of course. Next, we see her in the Philippines. It appears that she's there for some kind of job. She's where once she was at Lincoln Center and the Berlin Opera House or whatever. Now she's showing up to work at a place guarded by guys with submachine guns and whatnot. And she goes on a river cruise and she wants to swim. And the kid says, can't swim here because there's too many crocodiles and other monsters that escaped from a Marlon Brando film. This is an interesting place for Todd to go because it starts bringing up okay, in Apocalypse Now, we see the very unhealthy results of someone being in a godlike position where they're just in charge of everything and everyone is their servant or sycophant and wants to please them. Whether you've got a jungle compound where you're worshipped as a deity or you're a philharmonic conductor, it's not good for the human psyche to have that much power over people. Kurtz realized there was a problem and allowed a dashing Martin Sheen to take him out. Lydia is not that introspective. However, we do see really the only time in the film that she exhibits real remorse, that she even acknowledges that she's doing something wrong. We see her trying to cover her tracks and scrambling, but this is the first time she kind of takes accountability for what she's done. She wants to get a massage. They send her, oddly enough, to one of those places that's like a brothel where the women are behind glass with numbers. So she's looking at this. She locks eyes with one of the sex workers. And I think the woman was in the same position that Olga was with her clarinet. And I assume that was just so that Tár could make contact with Olga. I don't know if that's really where that instrument goes, but she's in that same position, staring back at her. She's wearing a 5, as in Mahler number 5. So something about this scene and then looking at her like she's a fucking asshole. It's a really weighted scene because they're looking at her like she's an asshole who would come here and exploit them. At the same time, this is how they make their living, so they have to put up with it. Not a lot of opportunities, I'm sure. The same way there's not a lot of opportunities to be a cellist. I'm sure it's not the same thing exactly. Not a one-to-one. Not a one-to-one. So finally, the weight of all she's done catches up with her. She runs out into the street and throws up, and we have our contrite Lydia, finally. The film's ending is pretty ambiguous, whether she's ended up in a shameful place or this is her kind of road to redemption. She is doing one of those events where they do the live orchestra to a film or a video game. So she's there and the audience is all in costumes. They're all cosplayers. She's up on stage. They're showing the video game on the screen behind her. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, don't you have to be a good conductor to do this kind of thing? Like when they do John Williams night at the Hollywood Bowl, they play along live with Jurassic Park at the San Francisco Symphony or whatever. They don't get the B team. They get like the good person because that's how they get the subscriptions and the people in the seats. It's kind of like a PBS pledge drive. This is where we bring out the Clash documentary, calling for a tote. If you had told her she'd be doing that a year earlier, she would have been mortified. But I think she's got a different perspective now, I hope. She's in a position with an orchestra that's super happy to be there. They're happy to be doing this and happy to be working with someone of Tár's caliber. The audience are probably really into it because they get to dress up and hear their favorite video game live. So she's in front of an appreciative audience with an appreciative orchestra. It's not where she thought she would be, but it's where she is. She's doing her craft. She's getting out of her own way. Even if the music is the score to a video game and you're in Manila, she's doing her thing. She's practicing what she preached earlier. She's engaging with it. She's taking it seriously. She's asking the same questions of the Philippine orchestra that she asked her Juilliard students to consider.
Let's talk a bit about the composer's intent with this piece.
I'm calling it a positive ending. It's not the last we've seen of Lydia Tár. Okay, I guess I had a lot to say about this film. I might have seemed overly critical of this film, but I really enjoyed it. I started to think of the people in it as real people. So what happens now? At the end of the film, we see Lydia in a pretty good place. She made it to the end of the film alive. She seems to understand that her actions have been problematic and not just because she got caught. Hopefully going forward, she will understand that other people also have feelings and value, and they weren't just placed on this earth for her amusement or her use. She doesn't have a lot of power left to abuse, but going forward, I'm optimistic that we will have a kinder, gentler, more considerate Lydia Tár. But I also want to address the fact that it's probably not such a great idea these days to amplify right-wing talking points in liberal spaces. And I'm counting an Oscar bait film about a lesbian orchestra conductor as a liberal space, even as a thought experiment. I understand the urge. I experiment with my thoughts all the time. But the place we are now in our culture where it's, why can't you see my perspective? All I'm saying is that the B-52s do not deserve happiness, not even the straight one. That Elliot Page is out to get us. Missouri needs to protect itself from Chaz Bono. It's just like, you know. So I'm pretty sure that this thought experiment is only really happening on this side of the fence because the other side is not interested in thoughts, thinking. Sounds a bit harsh, but that's kind of where we're at.
I do think that Tár is worth 2.5 hours of your time and the countless hours of supplemental study required, but it's a good film. I'm sorry it didn't do better at the Oscars, but I think Michelle earned her statue. My name is David, and I will talk to you soon.